त्र्यम्बकं यजामहे सुगन्धिं पुष्टिवर्धनम् उर्वारुकमिव बन्धनान् मृत्योर्मुक्षीयमामृतात्.
Welcome to Ayurveda and Spirituality with your host, Alakananda Ma, a renowned Ayurvedic expert and a graduate of a top London medical school. She is the principal of Alendi Ayurveda Gurukula, a unique apprenticeship-style school in Boulder, Colorado. She is a spiritual mother, teacher, flower essence maker, and storyteller. Join us as we uncover the timeless principles of Ayurveda, discover practical tips for enhancing vitality, and explore the deeper dimensions of spirituality that intertwine with the ancient science of life.
Okay, so we're continuing
Thanks.
our conversation about spirituality and activism. And to summarize where we got to, we were talking about how there can be quite a split between, on the one hand, me and my Zafu spiritual people focused on their own enlightenment, as it were, and on the other hand, the activists who are diving into action without necessarily checking in at all in terms of spirituality, but also sometimes there can be a split within oneself, having the spiritual side and the activist side. We talked about how at certain times in our life, maybe it is good to, when we're young especially, to focus on our spiritual path or alone, or to take a time of retreat where we are not connecting with world events. But then again, at a certain point, we want to be a whole human being and part of a whole human race and a whole planet. And we want to care about what's going on in our world. Our world has, I don't know whether I should say that our world has gotten smaller or our world has gotten bigger. Our world has gotten bigger because in the sense that before it was difficult to find out what was happening in faraway places. We might not even have known they existed. No one in Western countries would be protesting about human rights in the Aztec Empire because they didn't know it existed. They had their own human rights problems anyway. So, so on the one hand, our world has gotten much, much bigger because we now know about everywhere in the world. And on the other hand, our world has gotten very much smaller because we can instantaneously see what is happening all over the world. We don't even have to wait for the papers to come out the next day. Sorry, just throwing a box of tissues to Fernanda. So in this vast and at the same time very small world, the definition of our neighbor has most certainly changed. Who is our neighbor? The one who is near to us. Now everyone in the whole world is one who is near to us. So there's a story about Rabbi Hillel where someone challenges him to explain the essence of Torah while standing on one leg. Remember, Rabbi Hillel had many great talents, but yoga wasn't one of them. So he very quickly stood on one leg and said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength, and your neighbor as yourself. That is the whole of the law. The rest is commentary. And we have this same teaching later given by Jesus, who summarizes the law as you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and your neighbor as yourself, which is just one of the things that has convinced me that Jesus studied with Rabbi Hillel, the great Rabbi Hillel. So if we have to love our neighbor as ourselves, and our neighbor can now be in the DRC, can now be in Syria. Our neighbor can be anywhere in the world where someone can use a phone to show us what's happening to them. And also the people who can't, like the Uyghur, who are on an information, their genocide is under an information blackout, but still we hear from their family members. If our neighbor is everyone in the whole world, that does oblige us to, if we want to be spiritual, then we have to care about people all over the world, what's happening to them. Last time we had this satsang 4 years ago, we actually had Camila, who is Uyghur. She's a PhD student at the time at CU. And she came over and gave a talk about the situation of the Uyghur and the genocide that they were undergoing in Xinjiang in China. So that was pretty exciting. So yeah, we to love our neighbor as ourselves now means we do have an actual obligation to care about what's going on all over the world, because contemporary communication methods have made it possible to know what's going on all over the world, has made everyone our neighbor. Or like the last thing that our dear friend Swami Paramananda said before he left for India, the last class that he gave to the students ended with the words, we have to expand our concept of the hive. Bees of the same hive will go to the greatest lengths to help one another. Bees of a different hive will fight each other to the death. We have to see the whole planet as our hive. So we talked about how we think about spirituality and activism in terms of the 4 worlds outlined in Kabbalah, and how in this case, it's a descent of spirit into the world. There are 2 ways we can proceed through the 4 worlds. In this case, we proceed at the top from the Yud. So we began last time by talking about Atzilut, the spiritual world, and how in order to have spirituality in action, we first have to have spirituality. And not just, oh, I feel kind of spiritual when I go out in the woods, but an actual spiritual practice. And we talked about some great examples like Thich Nhat Hanh and the Cambodian monk Mahagoshananda, who lived through the Khmer Rouge and lost his whole family. We talked about his book, Step by Step, Meditations on Wisdom and Compassion, how it's possible to be so centered in meditation that our activism occurs imbued with peacefulness. Then we talked about Bariya, the conceptual world, and how we have to change our thinking, as we've seen with studying NVC. We have to change things in the conceptual world. We have to come to understand that everyone is our neighbor and everyone's suffering matters as much as our own, that we should care as much to get the thorn out of our neighbor's foot as we do to get the thorn out of our own foot, and that this neighbor are now the people fleeing from the Goma area in the DRC, are the children who've just been kidnapped in Nigeria and being held to ransom, that our neighbors are all the people in Syria today celebrating the 13th anniversary of the Syrian revolution and still asking for the things they asked for 13 years ago. Freedom. Still asking to have what we take for granted every single day. We may feel like we've got a lousy election coming because maybe a lot of us don't feel excited about either candidate, but we can be sure that our vote will be counted. And it isn't going to go 90% for one candidate. And we're not going to be imprisoned, starved, and tortured for our views about the candidates either. So we have a liberal democracy which others starve and die for. That's literally why I became an American citizen. When I saw people in Egypt were dying for the right to vote, I thought, gosh, I'm not a citizen. I'm like not bothering to have the right to vote that other people think is worth dying for. Also got a postal vote in the UK, so I get to vote in two countries because I'm a citizen of both of them. So now we're coming on to Yetzirah, the world of feeling. Feelings are important because to be a spiritual activist, we have to put our heart into it. When we're doing an action, so much of it is about our feeling, our emotional tone. We don't want to come to that action with raw, unprocessed own stuff, and then we take that and we turn that out to be our anger at what we're protesting against. Then we become strident, we become ineffective. So we don't want to come to our actions like that. They're a very specific emotional tone, feeling that we want to cultivate. We want to cultivate loving kindness and compassion. I know loving kindness and compassion are much more than feelings. They are much more than emotions. They are the ground of everything. The true nature of everything consists of the four immeasurables: loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So they're much more than feelings, but we want to activate ourselves with that tone of loving kindness. That takes effort. That's what we've been studying since the beginning of this academic year, learning how to imbue what we do with loving kindness. So just to remind ourselves, loving kindness is the wish for everyone to be happy. Compassion is the wish for everyone to be free from their suffering. We want to connect with that intention at the beginning of the day. We want to connect with that intention again and again throughout the day. Motivation. We want to be motivated by this aspiration. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from every type of suffering. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings attain full enlightenment. That motivation that's so fundamental has to influence our emotional tone. Of course, we have all kinds of emotions that come and go throughout the day, the week, the month. But the ground of it all is our loving kindness and compassion. And there's a teaching in Buddhism that is called unbearable compassion. It's a very hard thing. Unbearable compassion is that when you truly feel the suffering of beings, how they suffer fundamentally from ignorance, but also how they suffer in so many ways, how the birds are suffering from their loss of habitat, how the animals are suffering from being hunted, how the human beings are suffering from hunger and thirst and war and persecution and all kinds of oppression. And then the fundamental suffering of ignorance, that we allow ourselves to be open to this to the point where it's actually unbearable. Wow. This is what needs to happen. The unbearable compassion. From this sense of unbearable compassion, it's not just, oh, this is so horrible. That's what provides us with profound motivation. The profound motivation, may I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. May I attain the state of Tara, the goddess of compassion, for the benefit of all beings. We want to be able to do something about all this suffering, and we can. We can do something on the absolute level about all this suffering by committing ourselves to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. And we can do something on the relative level about all this suffering by putting sand in the machine, as we've talked about before, by whatever tiny, tiny, small actions we can take on a daily basis that is motivated by our real care for the suffering of others, by caring to know what's going on in other places, by thinking that it matters. We talked last time about Neville Chamberlain, who was the British Prime Minister at the start of World War II, and who, when Czechoslovakia was invaded, the Sudetenland was invaded by the Nazis, he so much didn't want a war, he said, we don't need to worry about the goings-on in faraway places of which we know little. That was a fatal mistake, because the next thing that happened was that Poland was invaded. Poland was an ally, and the war started. That was that. Could have been nipped in the bud if Czechoslovakia had not been seen as a faraway country of which we know little. So we don't have the leisure at this point to think of anywhere as a faraway place of which we know little. I think I told you last time about Timbuktu. When I was a little girl, the word Timbuktu, I didn't know that it was a real place. It just meant somewhere that's so far away and so remote that we don't know anything about it. Now we can see on our computers and on our televisions the sufferings of people in Timbuktu. And what a wonderful place, what a wonderful culture could be lost there if we don't rouse up and care about it. So allowing ourselves to open to unbearable compassion, to love our neighbor as ourselves and have our neighbor be every single person, every single animal, every single bird, but especially every single person. That's what we want to connect in with. There's more than 1 billion Muslims in the world, and majority of them do pray 5 times a day. In some groups, you can lump the prayers together and have it be 3 times a day, but majority of them do pray 5 times a day. And basis of the whole prayer is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. It starts off with, in the name of Allah, the divine mercy, the womb of divine compassion. That is being, we may not be participants in that ourselves. That is being recited across the world. So throughout our whole day, because of different time zones, this calling to the deity whose very nature is mercy and compassion. That's happening all the time. Calling again and again on the divine mercy, the divine compassion. Checking in again and again in the morning for ourselves. May all beings be happy. And then coming into Asiya, coming into the world of action. What are actions that we can engage in? One action that I put a ton of time into was to try to start a co-op in Boulder. Grassroots activism. I put 5 years of time into it because we wanted to be able to get food without having to go through a corporation. In the end, you still have to purchase wholesale from a corporation. But we were baking, we were doing daily items, we were picking the products. We almost, because Whole Foods had just come to Boulder at that point, we actually thought of calling the co-op Holier Foods, but it ended up being Boulder Co-op Market. And yeah, sadly, it did end up not being successful, but I put a lot of strength into it for a long while because it seemed like, because I believed in the cooperative movement, because, as you know, I was raised socialist. I was raised in a country where the cooperative movement is a big deal. There are still a lot of big types of co-ops in Britain. And I remember in O-level history in economics, when we learned about the cooperative movement, and I went right out and bought a membership for the co-op because I thought, yes, that's what we should do. We should cooperate. Now, lately, I've been very, very, very upset with capitalism. And I said to God, why aren't you doing anything about capitalism? And God said to me, but I have. I sent a prophet. I sent Karl Marx, a great Jew, a prophet, to try to solve this. That's just my little jokes, but it's kind of really difficult that I can't see you guys at all, like any of you, but
We're here.
you're here. I just can't see
We're
you.
here. Yeah.
I can't read the room.
And I laughed to myself.
That's good. Yes. It's been a very comforting thought for me that when I realized that Karl Marx was not only a great Jew, but actually a prophet who actually came to teach us something. And all the history I learned in the UK in A-level history was basically Marxist history and the cooperative movement. So deeply believing in cooperation over competition and food for people, not for profit, who worked on the co-op. There are so many things that we can do. We can vote with our votes, not only in the presidential elections, but in the local, where we can try to vote for people that will do things about things we care about, like housing unhoused people. We can vote with our dollar by being careful what we buy. Sadananda and I have also been deeply concerned about Tibet. It's been Tibet was invaded by the Chinese when I was a very little child. But when we did get a television, I do remember seeing the then very young Dalai Lama on television. I can clearly remember that. So we've been really, really concerned about Tibet, and we were working with Pema of Colorado Free Tibet, and we were trying to do a boycott of Chinese goods as a way of supporting Tibet. And it just kept getting harder and harder, because even if you buy something that says made in America and then you look closer and it says all the components are made in China. It was made in Japan, but the components are made in China. So eventually Pema said, look, if it's only made in China, you can buy it from China. If you need it, you actually need it. You can't get it any other way. But if you can buy it made in America, try to get it made in America. But that was something that we attempted to do, that we can always try to do, is vote with our dollar. So there's lots of different ways that we can engage in activism. And it can get down to a very minute and daily level. So in the Vedic tradition, in a few short weeks, we will together read the Purusha Suktam. That will be part of how we'll gain a deeper understanding of the Vedic worldview during our subtle therapies class. And in that class, it's told that in the beginning, there is just one person, the Purusha. But the Purusha thinks just being him is pretty boring. So he decides to sacrifice himself. So out of his mind, he brings forth all these devas, all these cosmic energies. So then the devas tie him to the sacrificial post and they sacrifice him. And all the different parts of this one person become everything in the world, all the people, all the animals, all the plants. We'll read about it in detail. So that one Purusha, the one has become the many. The one Purusha has been cut up, as it were, into many, many pieces. By our satkarmas, by our daily actions, we can return that many back to the one. Same story then in Kabbalah. The Zohar, the splendor, the divine splendor is enclosed in these vessels, but the light is so brilliant, the vessels can't hold it. The vessels shudder, they crack, and the light begins to pour down through all the worlds until it comes all the way into our world. So now there's atoms of light, of that divine light in everything. And there's a spark of the Shekinah, of the divine glory in everything. And through our tiny, tiny actions, we can one. Can you still hear? It's not good now. Hello?
It broke up for a second, but it's fine now.
I'm going to try and get on the extension, so I'm going to freeze for a moment. Hello?
Now we can hear you, Mom.
Okay, great.
Did
Did you hear the story about the Zohar and the sparks of light?
They're gone
Are they gone?
We're here.
No. Yeah, did you hear the story about the what Zohar, about the vessels and the sparks of light?
I haven't.
I was just telling it, you didn't hear it.
I didn't hear it. No, I'm sorry.
No, we didn't hear that story.
Did you hear about the Purusha?
Yes.
Yes.
So you heard about how the Purusha, the original person, sacrificed himself to become one, to
Mhm.
become many, because it was boring being just one. But then you didn't hear about Kabbalah. Is that right?
That's correct for me.
Because it broke up.
Mhm.
So that like amazingly similar story, the Zohar, the splendor is enclosed, the Shekhinah, it's enclosed in these vessels, but it's too bright for the vessels. The vessels shatter, the light pours down, the light falls all the way to our world. And in every being of the world, there is a spark of that light. Literally in every slice of pizza, there's a spark of that light. So in all of our tiny actions, we can return that light back to the one. So it's really has amazed Sadananda and me when we learned these two stories from these two great traditions and saw how they are saying the same thing, that the spark, or in that song, I think it was one of the last songs by Leonard Cohen that says, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets through. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets through. He was actually referring to this story. He was pretty deeply versed, not only in Zen, but also in Jewish spirituality. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets through.
That's how the light gets in.
There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So then it's correcting my mistakes there. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Through the crack. So this is the concept of tikkun olam. Olam is the world. It's alam in Arabic and olam in Hebrew. Tikkun is the mending. Tikkun olam is the mending of the world, the healing of the world. To heal the world, we can work in even the tiniest ways. The old way of doing tikkun olam, it's just you follow the rules. What are you putting on your shoes? You put in your left foot first and then your right foot. Then you tie the right shoelace and then you tie the left shoelace. And then you say the blessing of putting on shoes. Small, small things throughout the whole day that make this tikkun. But in our Aquarian way, it's not just the small, small rules. As one of my patients who was raised Orthodox says, Judaism is the best religion for someone who has OCD. But that same level of awareness, that incredible awareness that if you practice Orthodox Judaism, you bring to every spoon, to every shoe, to every piece of clothing, to every time you pass through a door. We have to bring that same kind of awareness to our life, to these small actions, every shopping bag, everything we buy, all of our attitudes. So for us, we liberate these sparks. We don't have to follow so many rules and regulations, although I really enjoy following some of them because it like sacralizes your day. It's fun. But we don't have to follow all the rules and regulations, but we pay attention to everything. There was a documentary that was written about a can of tomato paste. Where is the can mined from? Who did the mining? What happened to the miners? How was the can made? Who grew the tomatoes? How were they paid? Who worked in the factory processing the tomatoes? Every aspect of all of the human rights issues that can go into a can of tomato paste. And this is a great documentary on the can of tomato paste. So working in the world of Asiya means paying attention. Who made it? What did they get paid? How did they grow it? How was it produced? How did it get here? And do I really need it? There's so many small ways we can be activists. There are petitions we can sign. There are letters we can write. There are phone calls we can make. There are so many small things we can do throughout the day. It's not only the huge actions like when we went on the Women's March. There was a whole, on the Women's March after Trump was elected, there was a whole Alandi contingent. And we were all like hand in hand walking through the Women's March, and I had a big sign that said, "Make empathy great again." And I became famous throughout the whole march as the empathy woman. The person with the empathy sign. The march was so big and so many people had their phones, it knocked out the entire internet in Denver and nobody could work that day. It was enormous. So sometimes there's a really big action going on a bus, going to a huge march for women's rights. But there's many, many tiny, small ways to put sand in the machine every day. You have to see the cause that calls you. You know, like what speaks to you. My ancestors during the Holocaust, my family members were persecuted much the same way the Uyghur are being persecuted now in China. So naturally, I will feel an affinity with that cause of the Uyghur, especially because it's a forgotten cause that so few people even think about. Syria spoke to us because it was so unbearable. And we had to try to think every day, and we still think every day, what's an action I can do today to help, to make some tiny bit of difference to this horrible situation where there are still all these people starving and being tortured and disappeared in Assad's prisons, and people are still getting bombed every single day by Assad and Russia and Hezbollah in Syria. And so those were causes that spoke to us. Different causes speak to different people. We can't do everything. You find what calls you. You find what calls you and you commit to it. And it's a refinement of our actions on a daily basis that endows meaning to big actions, like when we do something like go on the Women's March. Any questions or thoughts?
Thank you, Ma. I don't have any questions, but thank you for sharing your perspective and your wisdom with us.
Yes. Thanks, Ma. I also
Yeah.
don't have any questions.
Yeah. Did you have any comments sitting in there?
No, just
Talk loud. Yeah.
the similarity between the um, the path that developed in India and the Jewish path. And like Tantra and where Tantra means to weave a rug, weave something together. So you take, instead of
Can you hear Sadananda?
Yes, we
instead of
I can hear
instead,
him.
instead of renouncing the world, you use the substances of the world and you raise them up. So like, instead of like becoming a barefoot monk, you take your shoes and put the left one in there and the right one in there and tie them up, and with your prayer and make make it holy.
Sorry.
So the similarity is very similar.
So it's this Sadananda is expressing how it's been amazing for us on our journey. When we started deeply studying Judaism for all those years with Reb Zalman and other great teachers, we saw the similarity that Jewish practice is tantric, not only because it does have sexual tantra. It's the only two religions that really have great sexual tantra practices, because you make love with the one you love on Shabbat to unite the Shekhinah and the Ein Sof. But it's much more than that. It's the tantra of using every single thing of daily life, which we see in all the tantric paths, including the Jewish path, and every small thing. And then with our activism, we extend that to think about the impacts of our small actions, the negative impacts that a small choice can have, the huge positive impacts that a small choice can have. And it gives us some power.
And that in Tantra it means to weave. So you're weaving a new world for the world.
Do you hear him? He says we're weaving a new world for the world.
And like when we went to the wool shop,
Oh, it's a story about, he's telling the story about the wool shop. But there used to be a wool shop down at Table Mesa, and we were coming home from Denver, and we stopped to get some darning wool, and we got darning wool for the sweater, and then Sadananda said, but we need this and this and this color wool to darn this and this and this. And it was Friday afternoon. And we had just learned the teaching. Listen to the words of the Gentile on Friday afternoon because they will bring you a message for Shabbat. And this woman looked at me and she said, now the whole world is going to be mended. So I donned all those things with a feeling of tikkun olam, of mending the world. So our small actions have a value. Not that we cannot take upon ourselves, as we talked about when we talked about the environment. We can't take the blame upon ourselves, like the corporations are trying to make us take the blame for climate change, that we didn't recycle enough when they're destroying the whole world. But we could choose not to buy something from that corporation. You know, we have our own little ways of getting our own back. It's empowering to know that we can keep putting sand in the machine. And also to see that we see what causes call us. You know, for some people, it's like 100% factory farms. That's their cause. You know, whatever it is, whatever cause speaks to you, you can apply yourself to that. Like how for sudden I mean, we care about all these causes, but Syria, just like, it was so unbearable every day to see what was happening. And we've just, for 13 years now, we've been applying ourselves to try to find small ways to do something.
Thank you for tuning in to Ayurveda and Spirituality with Alakananda Ma. We hope today's exploration has ignited a spark of curiosity and insight within you. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and share it with a friend. For more enlightening discussions and practical wisdom on Ayurveda and spirituality, subscribe and join our Facebook group, Alundi Ayurveda. To allow us to continue sharing valuable content, consider donating to Alundi Ashram. The links will be in the show notes. Until next time, may you walk the path of Ayurveda with grace and embrace the light of spiritual wisdom in your journey.
Trayambakam yajamahe sugandhim pushtivardhanam